Hello, this is Christine and Monica in the Business Studies Department, and we're just going to talk about how LiLac has impacted our lessons and the progress that students have been able to make because of the LiLac activities we've used.
So firstly, we're going to talk about the impact LiLac has had overall in our teaching and students' involvement in their learning.
One thing is that because of the different LiLac activities that we do in our lessons, students are a lot more engaged and they participate more in lessons, which is really good.
We have also seen improvement in their speaking and listening skills as well.
And also big improvements in their writing skills because lots of the activities we do involve helping them to scaffold their answers and deconstructing model answers so that they know what goes into a good written answer. Some of our favorite activities, well, one of my favorite activities is I have this business studies ranking diamond where students are given a variety of options and they have to discuss in pairs or in threes where each of these options go on this ranking diamond. So it forces them to use business studies terminology and talking about positives and negatives of certain options, which is a skill that they need to do in their written answers in their exam papers.
And one of my favorite activities that I do quite a lot is dictogloss, which I'm sure Sumaya will tell you a lot about, and you'll get to learn a lot about as well. Dictogloss basically involves developing lots of students' pre-reading skills, how to predict the outcomes before a text is revealed to them, and also it's teaching them how to analyze various texts. Another activity I also use a lot is a range of focused listening tasks, and this has really helped the students both in English and business studies to improve their organizational skills, particularly in their written work. Yeah, and that's it.
Watching activity really helps me with my knowledge of types of ownership. This is a difficult topic in business. I find discussing the cards with my partner really helpful, and each time we do this, I get better at it.
How Miss breaks down answers and she shows exactly what to include in them, and activities like this where there's loads of things modelled up, it's good when we match them up because you can see what's right and wrong so you know what to do in the future.
LiLac had quite a big impact on the way I teach, certainly my GCSE theory lessons. In the past, I've spent a lot of time getting students to learn the knowledge required for them to pass the exam. I've not focused on how they pass the exam. And one major change on the new spec for PE was the development of the long answer question, which is a 6-mark written question without any structure. And the first group I took through with the new spec was a bottom set class who would naturally have difficulty coping with a huge amount of writing. The teaching and learning cycle that we studied and focused on as part of LiLac really helped me get the students through that long answer question, so much so that the students, some of the better students in that class were producing really high quality work and getting 5 and 6 marks out of a potential possible 6 marks, using the structures and the format that we put in place as a result of LiLac.
One of the things that really interested me about the LiLac course was trying to implement some literacy strategies from very early on, as in Key Stage 3, in preparation for the GCSE at Key Stage 4. We don't get any time within a classroom in Key Stage 3, which is a real big struggle when they make that transition at GCSE level. So some of the strategies that were extremely helpful were the mode continuum, the teaching learning cycle, and by having these in place so early on, it allowed pupils to be more confident and more aware of these strategies. So when it came to answering long answer questions and the exam paper, it came as something that was quite easy because they knew the structure already.
Okay, as DT teachers, we always knew that teaching literacy was important. We always tried to teach literacy in DT because we knew that at the end of the day, for kids to succeed at GCSE and actually even beyond, if they want to go and do a design degree or be a designer, they need to be able to speak about design in an articulate way and also write about it. And yet, we often felt quite frustrated because students would study with us for 5 years, and yet they would come to their GCSEs and produce writing that was just absolutely terrible. For example, like this. It's a common misconception that you can get a GCSE DT, resistant materials or textiles, without knowing how to write. This is not true. 40% of our GCSE is assessed through exam, and the questions that they get asked on there, they're asked to write in very, very specific styles, and the children just really couldn't do it. They would get asked to write instructions, and they would put a few incomprehensible scribbles on a piece of paper, or write a story, or write something that was really just not in the correct style at all. Now, we knew this was a problem, and when the LiLac strategies were presented to us, we saw an immediate way of improving the situation, and we began to change the way in which we teach literacy. I was the first person in the DT department to do the LiLac course, and when I did the LiLac course, at the time I was teaching food technology, and I guess I kind of thought, although we don't do a food technology GCSE, it's a great kind of way in which to teach kids how to write instructions properly, because obviously the main kind of text that the children encounter during food technology is a recipe, which is a set of instructions. Now, the LiLac course gives you a very kind of clear way in which to approach teaching certain kinds of text types, and basically what I did is I used the teaching and learning cycle in order to help me plan a new kind of food lesson, if you like. The first thing that I did, which I'd never done before with the children, is I sat them down and I made them look at a recipe and deconstruct the text and really think about the sort of nuances and rules of recipe writing. So I showed them basically this text here. The students, I think it was actually quite enlightening, particularly for some of the students who perhaps had never encountered a recipe in English before, and some of the students had never really a lot of the students were quite surprised to see that recipes have rules such as the fact that they have to be written in the imperative tense, I think, without the word you, and the fact that, you know, they quite liked learning new vocabulary and seeing the multitude of ways in which you can describe cutting in food technology, for example. After we'd looked at the ways in which recipes were written and deconstructed the text, I then went on to use my demonstration as a time to get them to do what's called structured listening. Now, demonstrations in DT are problematic. Often children get very, well, not bored, I wouldn't say, but they can get distracted quite easily and go off task and start staring out the window rather than listening to what you're saying. So rather than have the kids just watching the demonstration, I made sure they were watching and also listening and being asked to do something active, i.e. write down whilst I was demonstrating. And I told them that after the demonstration they'd have to write a recipe, and so whilst I was demonstrating, they were using their time well and making notes to enable them to write a recipe. So this is an example of a student who had recently arrived in the country, who, to be honest, if I'd asked her to write a recipe without making these notes previously, she probably would have produced very little. But because she was allowed to make notes, she was enabled to produce quite a good piece of writing after the demonstration. Okay, now as you can see, those instructions, written by a very new arrival to the country in Year 8, are actually much better than the instructions that were written by the Year 11 students for their GCSE. So I could see that my strategies were working, and I decided to use this structured listening during demonstrations, not only with my Year 8 students, but also with my GCSE students. We did very similar activities with Year 11s, getting them to write notes during demonstrations and then do exam-style instruction writing questions. I think this was really beneficial for GCSE students, and I think that it's one of the it was one of the factors which helped us to get really good grades in textiles this year at GCSE.
And another one of the things we're doing at Key Stage 3 was joint construction. So we did talk like an expert to try and encourage the children to develop some specific technical language, but also to try and get a coherent idea about a particular designer. And we chose Anton Gaudi. Now here's an example of some note-taking they did in preparation for their opportunity to talk like an expert.
Okay.
And what that enabled them to do was to go on, after doing their talk like an expert pitch, and write a really, quite detailed biography of Gaudi to go along with their design work.